Evan Mazza here, back for another edition of Mazza on Sports. Here to talk about the NFL playoffs, recapping the wild card weekend from this past week, previewing the divisional playoffs. John Harbaugh has a new home. He's coming here to New York. And of course, the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes going around Major League Baseball. Who's going to sign Kyle Tucker? We should know today, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, whatever. We'll find out. It seems like the sweepstakes are coming to a head for Kyle Tucker, and who's going to sign the prize acquisition? Who knows? But we have to begin today with the NFL wildcard weekend. A good weekend around the playoffs. The wild card is my personal favorite weekend around the playoffs. I know a lot of people, of course, there's the Super Bowl. We all love the Super Bowl. A lot of people love to say the divisional round, but my personal favorite is the wild card. You really never know sometimes with the wild card. Obviously, there are games that are blowouts, but you really don't know sometimes with the wild card. The wild card round can be a lot of fun. That's my personal favorite round in the NFL playoffs. And we got a scrappy one right off the bat between the Rams and the Carolina Panthers. Oh, of course, we have to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers firing Mike Tomlin. We'll get into that, of course, and the Steelers and where they're going. But obviously, again, we'll get to that in a second. We can begin with Wild Card Weekend, the Rams and the Panthers. A good game here between them. The Panthers, look, they beat the Rams earlier in the season. They beat the Rams not even like a month or so ago. They beat the Rams in Carolina. And the Panthers, they've been pesky. I know they kind of backed into the playoffs with the Bucs collapsing down the stretch, going 2-7. They did lose Bay in the final week of the season. They had to get a win from the Saints in order to even get in the next day later. So, of course, yeah, did they sort of back in? Sure. But you know what? They still kept pace with the Bucs. The Bucs they collapsed. They went 2-7 and finished the season. That's on the Bucs. But the Panthers gave the Rams a good game here. They gave them a good battle here. And actually, you kind of saw with the Rams why I'm not fully confident. It's really interesting. The Los Angeles Rams, before they played the Seahawks, they were a team a lot of people were ready to pick are going to go to the Super Bowl. Matthew Stafford's having an MVP season, and they were ready to crown them going to the Super Bowl and be everyone's favorite pick to go to represent the NFC. But ever since that loss to the Seahawks, they've kind of been treading water and playing close games. And this game against Carolina was kind of that. You saw some of their weaknesses. They did win on a Matthew Stafford game-winning drive as Stafford continues to build his legacy now in the postseason, because really ever since he became the Rams quarterback, his postseasons have been a lot better than they were in Detroit. Now, granted, he didn't go to the playoffs often in Detroit. He only has, I think he only had about 2 or 3 postseason appearances when he was in Detroit. He's been to the playoffs now more often since he's been the Rams quarterback since he got there in 2021. But he is now showing his prowess and his resume and his knack for the game-winning drive in the postseason for the Rams. And he did that again in Carolina, throwing a game-winning touchdown pass, or the pass ended up being the game winner as the Rams won that game 34-31. But again, a scrappy game by Carolina, a decent game from Bryce Young. He went 21 of 40 for 264 and a touchdown. He did throw a pick, but a decent game for Bryce Young in his postseason debut. The Panthers are going to pick up his 5th-year option. Honestly, I do think it's well-deserved. He's played pretty well last year. He finished the season the year before strong. He's been able to bounce back from a very, very, very tough start to his career. And he's very well-deserved of a 5th-year option. But Carolina, again, the Rams were just too much. But you give credit to the Panthers. They've been scrappy all year, and they definitely showed some mettle. And I know that a lot of people kind of laughed at them and such, but I think the Panthers did a good job at least holding their own against a very good Rams team. But for the Rams, again, a game where they didn't really dominate, a game that they had to battle and scratch and claw. This was a road playoff game, obviously. That's always tough. But I think you expected the Rams to kind of pull away in this one. But again, this was a Panther team that did beat them before in Carolina. So we'll see how the Rams will do as this postseason goes on. We'll tell you, of course, where they'll be next week in a few seconds. But that brings us actually to the next game, Saturday night, where the Rams will go this weekend. The Green Bay Packers at the Chicago Bears. This probably, at least in my memory, at least in all my years as a football fan, I've been watching football since 1997 or 1998. And that was the year where the Green Bay Packers lost the Super Bowl to the Denver Broncos. And that was a great game. That was, a great game between two really good teams. But that was a game where the Packers looking to win their second straight Super Bowl. This would have been the second one with Brett Favre. The Packers and Favre had won a Super Bowl the year before against the New England Patriots. But they were looking to become a dynasty. They were looking to become a team that goes back to back and a team that would win more than one. And of course, Denver was facing John Elway. Denver had John Elway. Elway was trying to get his first at 36 years old. He hadn't won a Super Bowl. He was 0 for 3 in previous Super Bowls. So, but the Packers lost that game, even though Brett Favre outplayed John Elway. But the Packers ended up losing that game, and they wouldn't have. From then on out, they've been having tough postseason defeats. From at least from before Super Bowl 45, and then after Super Bowl 45. They had 4th and 26 when they lost to Philadelphia. They, of course, had the Giants NFC Championship game in 2007. Then we get to post Super Bowl 45 after they won that game and beat the Steelers in the Rodgers era. Following year later, they lose to the Giants in the first round after a 15-1 season when they were looking to defend their championship. And then most famously, the NFC Championship game in 2014. There was other games, of course, like the NFC Championship against the 49ers, but the NFC title game, or when they were in Green Bay, but the NFC Championship game against the Seahawks. So they've had some very tough postseason defeats before Super Bowl 45 and after Super Bowl 45 and after Super Bowl 30 and after Super Bowl 30. Top it all. This might top losing the Super Bowl to Denver in the manner that they did, because they came that close to going back to back. This might top 4th and 26 against the Eagles. This might top 2007 against the Giants. This might in the NFC Championship game, or 2011 against the Giants in the divisional playoff. This might top the 2014 NFC Championship game against Seattle, or even the 2021 NFC Championship game in San Francisco. This loss was that bad. You were up 21-3 against your arch rival in Chicago, and you let it get away. You let it get away from you. The Bears, the cardiac Bears who have been doing this all season long, just turn it on in the second half or fourth quarter of games, and they win it. And we saw it again. And you saw big plays from the Bears offense. Caleb Williams, this isn't a slight at him at all, but Caleb Williams is such a better quarterback outside the pocket than he is in the pocket. I don't think that's a slight at him, especially in this day and age of the NFL, where quarterbacks, you need to have them be good outside the pocket nowadays and scramble and run. But what Caleb Williams was able to do in this game showed you exactly his talent and how good he is outside the pocket. That throw he made was spectacular in the fourth quarter. But you also saw the Packers, again, offensively, they slowed down in the second half, weren't able to get much going. The defense, you saw the effect of them not having Micah Parsons. McManus had a rough day. Just a combination of a lot of things for the Packers, and the Bears end up coming back and getting, I suffice to say, now, if there's any Bears fan out there that disagrees, go ahead. This is the biggest win the Bears have had since they won the NFC Championship in 2006 when they beat Seattle. I would say this win is close to when they won the Super Bowl when they beat New England back in 1985. This was that big of a win if you were the Bears, because you have to remember, the Bears and the Packers have a long storied history, a long storied rivalry that has gone on for 100 years. But ever since 1992, the Green Bay Packers have essentially dominated this rivalry. from Brett Favre beating them all the time to Aaron Rodgers beating them all the time, and then now Jordan Love having their number in the last few years since Jordan Love became the quarterback. The Packers have owned the Bears since the Packers have owned them since 92. For the Bears to finally get one on the Packers is just gigantic. If the Bears don't go any farther in the playoffs, if they don't go any further in the playoffs, they can look back and say, hey, we got the Packers in the playoffs. We got them. We beat them. They can at least say that. They can at least say, hey, we got the Packers. We beat them, and we came back and beat them in the manner that we beat them. So they can at least have that. But this was a unbelievably great comeback win for the Bears. And you look at it too, they are on a magical ride. Like the Bears have had great comeback win after great comeback win this year. They're just on that magical carpet ride where they could go to the Super Bowl and it wouldn't surprise me. They've just been on a roll. Their defense isn't great. They give up too many yards, although they get turnovers, but they give up too many yards and sometimes too many points. But this offense has weapons, and Caleb Williams is really growing into a franchise quarterback for the first time. Look, I'll say for the first time since Jay Cutler. I didn't think Jay Cutler was a bad quarterback for the Bears. I liked Jay Cutler when he was in Chicago. I didn't blame him much for a lot of their problems. But if you want to say since Sid Luckman, go ahead, say Sid Luckman. But they got themselves a quarterback, Chicago. The Bears have themselves a quarterback. Caleb Williams is good. He's legit. And Ben Johnson, what he's been able to bring to them. Now, I don't think it was a good idea to do what he did with Matt LaFleur. I think that could come back and bite him in the butt next year. So I think Ben Johnson needs to kind of cool it because this act might bite him in the butt next year. But for at least today and for now, he looks like a genius. And the Bears get their biggest win since the NFC Championship in 2006. So good on the Bears, but an unbelievable comeback win. They win 31-27 after being down 21-3. And they're just on a magic ride. And if you're a Bears fan, get on the ride and enjoy it. Get on the ride and enjoy it because this is as fun. If you're a Bears fan, this is as fun as you've had in a long time. That includes the playoffs and that 2018 season. This is as fun as they had since 2010, even 2006. So if you're a Bears fan, enjoy it. And to beat the Packers two times in a season, doesn't happen often, right? If you're a Bears fan, you beat them in the playoffs for the first time since 1940, whatever it was, or 1930, whatever it was. And obviously, everyone remembers the 2010 NFC Championship game, which they lost to Green Bay. But this is as big of a win for the Bears they've had in their history. And if you're the Packers, one of the worst losses in their franchise history, one of the worst in their history. It just continues, at least post Super Bowl 45. It just continues a string of just really bad postseason defeats. They do have some passes this year. They had a lot of injuries. Obviously, they lost Parsons for the year. Jordan Love got hurt towards the tail end, towards the end of the season. We'll see what goes on with Matt LaFleur, although it looks like they're going to get a deal done with him. So it looks like LaFleur should be the coach going forward. But this was a rough one. This was a really bad, rough one for the Packers. And it ends what ends up being a disappointing season. There was a lot of hype and a lot of expectations for the Green Bay Packers coming into the season, especially after they got Micah Parsons, and then ends in the first round in the manner that it did. Granted, again, injuries have really affected them. So they will get a pass for that. And they will have high expectations, real high expectations next season to get to at least the NFC Championship game. But this was a very disappointing season for the Packers and a disappointing end to the Packers. And for the Bears, hey, to the victors go to spoils. You love this. And like I said, just enjoy the ride. Wherever the ride takes you, Bears fans, enjoy it. Because this is a fun team. Bears are a fun team. Bills beat the Jaguars 27-24. The Bills were underdogs coming into, at least I think they're underdogs coming into this game. the Bills to me are the better team, and I think the better team won this game. And what's interesting to me is that Trevor Lawrence, before this, Trevor Lawrence he threw 3 touchdowns, Trevor, but honestly, his numbers to me really don't indicate how poorly he did play. He threw 3 touchdowns, sure, but he honestly should have thrown at least 5 interceptions. He really should have thrown at least 5 interceptions in this game. I did not think Lawrence looked good at all in this game, to be honest. He didn't look comfortable. He didn't look at ease. Some passes were wild. A lot of passes batted down, inaccurate throws. Like I said, and there was about 3 or so dropped interceptions or should have been interceptions by the Bills. He did throw 2, but honestly, he should have thrown at least 3 more. So I just look at the Bills and I say, good win. Josh Allen continues to be a beast in the postseason. He's maybe the best postseason quarterback we've ever seen that doesn't have a Super Bowl ring, which says a lot considering the Buffalo Bills quarterback was Jim Kelly in the 90s, who won 4 consecutive AFC Championship games and never won a Super Bowl, of course. But Allen definitely, since Jim Kelly, is the best quarterback we've seen that doesn't have a ring in the postseason that doesn't have a ring. He's so good in the postseason, it's not even funny. He now has 6 postseason wins in his career since he came to the league in 2018, and since he started making the playoffs in 2019. But for the Bills, obviously, this was just step 1. This is, I post this on Twitter. This was the Bills. This is the best the Bills could get to the Super Bowl. This is the best postseason they can get to the Super Bowl. This is their best postseason. There's no Chiefs to stop them. They've beaten the Ravens twice, but still, I'll even throw in the Ravens. There's no Joe Burrow in the Bengals. This is it. This is it for the Bills. If you can't get to the Super Bowl now, when? And the thing is, unfortunately for the Bills, is that they have to go on the road more than likely. Depending on the results of the divisional round. This might be a 3-game postseason on the road, but still, they might not have another home game in the postseason. They might not have a home games. They might have to win 3 road games to make it to the Super Bowl. And this is their best chance. There's no team really that I can look at and say that, oh yeah, they're definitively better than the Bills. They're facing the Broncos this weekend, after they won this game against Jacksonville. But I can see Buffalo beating Denver. I don't think Denver is definitively better than Buffalo. The Broncos have a better defense, but this is Josh Allen we're talking about here. So I don't think the Bills and the Broncos offense is anything special. And I like Bo Nix, but their offense isn't anything special. So I don't think Denver is definitively better than the Bills. The Bills can go into Denver and beat them. They can on, I think it's Saturday. No, it's not. Yeah, it's Saturday. I think they can go in to Buffalo, or I think it's Sunday. I'll look it up. I think they can go in and win that game. But this is as good of a spot for the Bills in the playoffs as you can ask. If they can't get to the Super Bowl, it's on Saturday. If they can't get to the Super Bowl now, when? So, but they get the win against Jacksonville. And like I said, for Jacksonville, look, this was a great season for them overall. They were kind of directionless coming into the year. New coach, another new coach for Trevor Lawrence. And Lawrence has a resurgent season. This is really his first, he hadn't played like this really since the first half of 2023. First half of 23 played really well. Then the second half he struggled. He had some injuries too down the stretch that he was battling through. And then 24 was definitely a bad season for him. So this was definitely a make or break season for Trevor Lawrence. And he definitely proved himself to still be, a pretty darn good quarterback at the very least. And that's that guy that the Jaguars picked number 1 overall some time ago. Now it's amazing. It's already been that, 5 years already for Trevor Lawrence since he was drafted. But, this was a good year, and they didn't even have Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter got hurt. I think Travis Hunter needs to be a primary wide receiver. I know that the Jaguars see him as a two-way player. I know Travis sees himself as a two-way player. I think the Jaguars just need to look at Travis Hunter and go, just be a wide receiver. There's more money to be made as a wide receiver and be that big playmaker for Trevor. So, but a good year for the Jaguars. They won the AFC South. They were able to beat out the Texans for the AFC South to win that division, which I don't think many people really thought they would. But still a good season for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And going into next year, we'll see how they are next year. I could see Jacksonville falling, kind of having a letdown season next year, but still a good 2025 for the Jaguars. But from a good season for a losing team to a very disappointing season and disappointing end for this team that lost. The Philadelphia Eagles fall to the San Francisco 49ers 23-19. Credit to the 49ers. They won this game. Brock Purdy played well overall, although he did make some mistakes, but overall he battled. McCaffrey I thought was great. The Niners defense played well. A good job by the Niners, who again have been hurt all year. They lost George Kittle in this game. He tears his Achilles. He's out for the remainder of the postseason, and who knows how long he could be out heading into next year. We'll see. Thoughts out to him. Hope he recovers well. Kittle's one of the best guys in the NFL, one of the best players that the league has. But he's one of the best players that the league has. So kudos to the 49ers for a big win on the road in Philadelphia to knock off and defeat the reigning defending Super Bowl champions. And we will have new Super Bowl champions this year. But this game to me, and I say this because this game to me is more about the Philadelphia Eagles than anything else. The Philadelphia Eagles, they never looked right all year long. And I think that's just offensively, their defense is great. Their defense was really good. But their offense just never seemed in sync. Saquon, look, I'm not saying it to replicate the 2,000-yard year he had, but even Saquon, I wouldn't say he had the greatest of seasons. He still ran for over 1,000 yards, but it feels like, we've seen seasons like that from a player where it's like, yeah, he still had a good year, but it wasn't like this. It wasn't the year you think of when you see this player, right? It was still a good year for Saquon Barkley, but not the best year for him. And really, I think that's at the end of the day where the Eagles, I think, season and their offense, kind of hurts because Saquon was so good for them last year. And Saquon, look, I like Jalen Hurts, but Saquon really made up for a lot of their offense last year and being how good he was. With him kind of, not having the season that he had a year ago, and you kind of figured he wouldn't because, again, he had a 2,000-yard whatever season, and it was a generational season. Saquon had 1,140 yards, only 7 touchdowns. He averaged 4.1 yards a carry. So, again, on 280 carries. So, again, not a fine year for Saquon, but not a great year for Saquon. I kind of compare it to Jamal Lewis in 2004. That was also coming off his 2,000-yard season. He had a good year in 2004, but not like a great year that maybe you expected him to have or thought he could have. So it really starts there. Saquon didn't really have the season that maybe you thought he could have. It was still a good year. But the big thing, of course, was the passing game. They got very little out of the passing game this year, and nothing was right. You had locker room stuff between A.J. Brown and Nick Sirianni and Kevin Patullo's play calling. The passing game was just never in sync. The whole offense was just never in sync at all throughout the season. And I thought that maybe they can be all right come playoff time because this is a team with experience. They've been to 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls. They won the Super Bowl the year before. They were expected to go back and repeat or try to repeat. For them to lose in this game, but this game was kind of the culmination of a whole season. Drop balls, but had some good runs here and there, but never really had the big runs or 2 or 3 that you're kind of used to having him see. Jalen never really got into sync. A lot of check downs, a lot of didn't look comfortable in the pocket. This was an Eagles offense that was just in neutral all year long, and they never really got it into full gear. And in the end, it cost them what could have been another Super Bowl season. And that's why Eagle fans are pissed off. That's why a lot of you see Philadelphia Eagle fans calling to fire Nick Sirianni. I wouldn't fire Nick Sirianni. This guy has been to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years. I've won one. I wouldn't fire the guy after he still made the playoffs this year, still won the division. But I wouldn't fire Nick Sirianni or anything like that. But there's certainly a lot of noise in the Eagles in their locker room that I definitely think now with this loss they're going to have to address. And I do think it starts with trading away A.J. Brown. I know Howie Roseman said he said today that you want to keep great players, and that's true, and A.J. Brown's a great player. It's just that, but I also think that was GM speak. I think Howie Roseman deep down knows that A.J. Brown was kind of a problem for the Eagles this year. So we'll see what they do with A.J. Brown. If he is traded or something like that, boy, he'd look good with the Ravens. He'd look good with the Chiefs. He'd look good with with some other contender, maybe the Giants. Well, no, not the Giants. I'm sorry. But definitely the Ravens or the Chiefs or Denver or something like that, or the Chargers. Man, if you watch the Chargers, we'll get to the Chargers. If you watch the Chargers, boy, they could use another big receiver. But this is an Eagles team. This is an Eagles team that really needs it needs some work done in the offseason for a team that won the Super Bowl a year ago. A year later, then we now look at this team and go, there's a lot they need to fix in that clubhouse and that locker room, and especially with that offense. Kevin Patullo was fired, so they will be looking for a new offensive coordinator. We'll see who they pick, but definitely a disappointing season for the Eagles, overall, and just an offense that just never fully got into sync, and you saw it fully against the 49ers. Speaking of the Chargers, like I said, the Patriots beat the Chargers 16-3. Again, more to do. Patriots played a good game, but more to do with the Chargers, and more to do with the fact that they just, aside from Justin Herbert, what the heck do they have on offense? Their offensive line injuries really have come back to bite them, losing guys like Joe Alt and Rashad. And, their offensive line was maybe the worst in football, and you saw it again. Justin Herbert was sacked 6 or 7 or 8 times. He was hit way too many times. Their defense did their best to hold it, to hold the fort against a solid offense. But really the story was the offense for the Chargers. And aside from Lloyd McConkey, what do they have? What do they have? Quentin Johnston's okay. What do they have on Keenan Allen? Is obviously in his prime, was a great receiver, but he's not in his prime anymore. He's far past his prime at this point. Great receiver, had a great career, but where is he in this stage of his career? He's definitely not what he was before. They need another couple big playmakers around Herbert. They definitely need some guys healthy on the offensive line, and maybe need another fix or two. They fired Greg Roman as their offensive coordinator, which is kind of the theme of Roman's career. Starts off fine, and then towards the last year or so, the offense gets stale, and they change and they fire him, and they go with a different coordinator. We saw it in San Francisco, we saw it in Buffalo, we saw it with the Ravens, and now we're seeing it with the Chargers. He's a good offensive coordinator, but there is kind of after a while, it's like, okay, his offense gets limited and gets stale. So it's like, what do we have to do after that? But you saw it again. There's really nothing much about this offense. And look, to Justin Herbert's thing, to talk about Herbert, look, he does need to play better. Obviously it's hard to ask when you're a guy with no offensive line and not much talent on the receivers aside from one receiver, but he does need to start playing better in these playoffs. He does. He's now 0 for 3. He's thrown more interceptions than touchdowns. He needs to play better in these postseasons. He needs to. So he's going to get some crap that maybe some Herbert fans and Charger fans, of course, won't want to hear and won't like to hear. But the reality is the reality. He's 0 3, and he needs to start winning playoff games to justify all this hype around him. Again, not all his fault about the game on Sunday, but you got to start winning playoff games. He's 0 3 now. And he hasn't played well in any of them. Not all his fault, but he hasn't played well in any of them. He has to start playing better in these playoff games, bottom line. I say the same thing for a lot of other quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson. In the playoffs, you got to play a lot better. And Justin Herbert, especially if we're going to hype you up every year. Justin Herbert's the same thing. You got to play a lot better if we're going to hype you up every year in these big postseason games and such. But the bottom line is the Patriots move on. They advance. Not a great game for New England, so to speak. But again, they're a good, well-balanced team on offense. They play good defense. And it'll be an interesting test to see what this Patriots offense looks like and the second-year quarterback Drake May looks like when they face their next opponent, the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans, this defense, look, the final score is 30-6. On Monday night against Pittsburgh, against the Steelers, the final score was 30-6, but it doesn't really tell the full story of how close this game really was. This was a 7-6 ball game around the third quarter. Houston, this was a 7-6 ball game heading to the fourth quarter. The story of this game is this: Houston's offense, sheesh, that was ugly. That was ugly. And C.J. Stroud turned the ball over 3 times, and he did not look good at all. And I don't know what has gone on with Stroud. I think he's a fine quarterback, but the pressure of that rookie and look, he's also lost receivers as well. Stephon Diggs is not there anymore, of course. But the rookie Stephon Diggs, we have really not seen the rookie CJ Stroud. We have not seen that guy in 2 years now. And this is a Texans defense that is good enough to get them to a Super Bowl. They are good. This defense is really good. And they get after the quarterback, and they apply pressure. They sack the quarterback. They make key stops. They get turnovers. They don't allow many points. This is a really good defense, and they're good enough to go to the Super Bowl or even win the Super Bowl. This offense for the Texans needs to wake up and needs to at least play better. CJ Stroud needs to play a lot better, because you can't turn the ball over 3 times like he did and expect to win the playoffs. They were able to, because there was a worse offense on this field in Pittsburgh, and it wasn't the Houston Texans. It was the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. This Steel offense was no match for the Houston Texans defense. Even though it was 7-6 in the fourth quarter, they were no match. No match. And the game was over the second they got that strip sack by Will Anderson and Rodgers, and Daniel Hunter took it all the way for a touchdown. When he did that, the game was over. It was over when he did that, when they scored that defensive touchdown. And then there was another, and then on the last play of Aaron Rodgers, maybe his career, it was a pick 6. So the Texans scored 2 defensive touchdowns in this game to win the game 30-6. The story of this game is their defense, is the Texans defense, and how inept the Steelers offense was, and how this game is the end of an era for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Heinz Field, I'm gonna keep calling it Heinz Field if you don't mind. I'm sorry. I will never call it Acrisure Field or whatever they call it now. Heinz Field, 2 weeks in a row, was the home of 2 end of eras. It was the home of the end of an era the week before with the Ravens, because 2 days later, John Harbaugh was fired. And it's the end of an era for their own coach, because Mike Tomlin, as I mentioned before, stepped down as the Steelers head coach the next day later, after they lost on Monday. Tuesday. On Tuesday, the next day later on Tuesday. So Mike Tomlin is now out as Steelers head coach. The man who's been head coach for 19 years, the longest tenured head coach in the NFL. That's not Andy Reid on one team. So I should say on one team, the longest tenured head coach on one team. Obviously, Belichick was for years with the Patriots. Andy Reid obviously has been from the Eagles to the Chiefs for so long. Even Sean Payton now has gone from the Saints, took a year off and went to Denver. But the longest tenured head coach on one team was Mike Tomlin. After Belichick left, left the Patriots, was Mike Tomlin, and he's now gone. So it's an end of an era. It truly is in the AFC North. Both Harbaugh and Tomlin are out as coaches of their respective teams after almost 20 years. And, virtually it was the same reason. It was at least with the Ravens and Harbaugh, they were still winning playoff games, but the Pittsburgh Steelers hadn't won a playoff game since 2016. That's almost a decade ago. And once again, they got blown out. Once again, they got blown out in a playoff game, and that just doesn't fly in Pittsburgh. That doesn't fly in Western Pennsylvania and the Steelers. That doesn't fly. And once again, they were blown out. They were blown out last year against the Ravens in 2023 or 2024. They were blown out Monday night against Houston. They were blown out 2017. They got beaten up by the Jaguars, and the Jaguars got 40 on them that day. They got beat up by Kansas City in 2021. They got beat up by Cleveland at home in 2020. They got beat up by Buffalo in a playoff game. So like this was kind of this was kind of a tough stretch because if you're the Steelers, you have to win playoff games. You have to win Super Bowls. And to go a decade without a playoff win is really tough. It's really tough. And to score 6 points at home is even tougher. So it's a tough way for Tomlin to go out, just like it was a tough way for Harbaugh to go out. But the Houston Texans defeat the Steelers, and Mike Tomlin is no longer the Steelers head coach. And the Steelers and Ravens are currently looking for head coaching jobs. And that's very weird. That is very strange and very weird to say and to see. But the Houston Texans, bottom line, they looked impressive defensively. Their offense, boy, that needs a lot of work, and they got to get better if they want to advance, because I think they could beat New England. They will face the Patriots on Sunday. This Sunday. They could beat New England. Their defense is good enough to beat New England, and certainly their defense will be the best defense Drake May has ever faced, and Drake May has faced certainly all season long. But we'll see how Houston's offense, how will they look against a good Patriots defense, because that defense that the Texans have is good enough to take them to the AFC Championship game and take them to maybe even the Super Bowl. So should be an interesting game between the Texans and the Patriots, but the bottom line is that defense is good, real good, very good. So that's the wild card weekend around the NFL. The divisional round, like I said, Bills Broncos on Saturday at 4:30. The main event, I think, of the whole division round, Seahawks 49ers round 3, Saturday night. Texans Patriots Sunday at 3:00, and then Rams Bears 6:30 Sunday evening. Should be a good division round matchups. I think, like I said, the big one to me is Seahawks 49ers. That should be a tremendous game. This will be the third time they've met. So I think that game is going to be a lot of fun and really good. Be interesting to see Seattle have the number 1 seed and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. This will be a home playoff game for them. So be interesting to see how does San Francisco adjust down to no George Kittle? How does Seattle adjust to the fact that there's no George Kittle for the 49ers? Kyle Shanahan's going to come in with a game plan without George Kittle. How will Sam Darnold, in his first ever home playoff game? Remember, Sam Darnold didn't have a home playoff game last year. He had to go on the road because they lost when he was in Minnesota. They lost to Detroit, and he had to go on the road to the Rams, and they lost that one. Sam Darnold now has to win a playoff game here or two, and this is his first home playoff game after having a playoff game last year on the road. And last year in the playoffs, he really struggled. So how will he handle this time around, and can the Seahawks offense kind of open up a bit? Don't be conservative. This is the playoffs. You can't be conservative. You can't be conservative with the Seahawks offense. You have to throw it around. You have to open it up. You have to run the football better. You can't be conservative. This is the playoffs. So, their defense is great. Seattle's defense is fantastic. But you got Sam Darnold. He can throw. So he's a good quarterback. So you have to really use him and trust him to make completions and to get the ball out to where it's got to go to Najigba and whoever, and then you have to ask Sam Darnold, don't turn the ball over. Don't turn the ball over, Sam. That's Sam Darnold's biggest thing. Do not turn the ball over. So that should be a really good game. Should be interesting. I think Bills Broncos, I could see Buffalo winning that game. In Buffalo, like I said, Denver's offense is not that impressive. Their defense is good, but Josh Allen's the quarterback. We'll see how he can handle it. Texans Patriots, I think, will be another low-scoring affair between two good defenses. Which offense will be the one that makes the big play first? I think that'll be the key to that game. Rams Bears. Supposedly there's going to be a lot of interesting weather. It's supposed to be very windy that day in Chicago. This is the fear that I had with the Rams, right? Another one where this was my other thing with the Rams. The fact that I said this before, they had to get the 1 seed. The Rams had to get the 1 seed because then they could have home field advantage in the warm weather environments of SoFi. If they didn't, they would have to go to Philadelphia. They'd have to go to Chicago, maybe Green Bay, so on and so forth, and they'd have to battle the elements. Now, because they didn't even Carolina was a rainy day. Now that they didn't win the division, they were able to beat the Panthers in Carolina. Now they got to go to Chicago in those elements and that wind, and it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough for the Rams. How does Sean McVay and the Rams adjust to it? We'll have to find out and see. But that is going to be very interesting. Very, very, very interesting to see. So, but the Bears should have the advantage coming into this game. Do I think the Bears against a Sean McVay coach team can come back in the fourth quarter? Maybe, but that's tough. That's very tough to come back in the fourth quarter against a Sean McVay coach team. But I think for the Bears, best thing, have a lead, run the football with your two good running backs, and get after Matthew Stafford. Keep the game, get ahead early, and let the Rams battle back in that wind. So in that environment. So we'll see. It's currently 9:14 right now. So the TNA, talk about a little wrestling, the TNA debut in AMC should be going on right now. I'm not watching. I don't have it on me, but it should be going on right now. I think AJ Styles actually is probably kicking off the show. I think I heard. So I'll keep you updated on the TNA as the show goes on, but it is the debut episode of TNA on AMC. To continue on with the NFL, of course, we have to talk about the big story around the NFL, at least in the coaching carousel. John Harbaugh was hired by the New York Giants. Late last night, it was reported by Adam Schefter that the Giants and Harbaugh were finalizing a 5-year contract. Nothing was official as of yet. I don't think anything is official, really, truly official as of yet. But Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter have all said that Harbaugh and the Giants are indeed finalizing a 5-year contract. So barring anything wacky, John Harbaugh will be the head coach of the New York Giants. And look, I think this is a great home run hire for the Giants. He's exactly the coach they need. This is the coach that they've needed for a long time. This is the guy. This is the coach that they've needed since Coughlin. And look, they needed somebody that can bring culture, that can bring leadership, that can bring stability, that can bring accountability to the players, to the locker room. He can also walk into the room. Here's a guy who can buying from Chris Collinsworth. Here's a guy who can walk into the locker room of the Giants, a young, brash locker room that hasn't won, or at least doesn't have any players from the 2022 or 2016 teams. Dexter Lawrence obviously is one of them, sure. But a locker room that really hasn't won. Okay, they haven't won. He will go into that locker room. These players are going to go, oh, wow, that guy's won. Oh, he's got a ring on his finger. Oh, he's won a lot of playoff games. Oh, he's won division titles. Oh, he's been to the playoffs a lot of times. Oh, he's won big games. Oh, this guy's a winner. Like immediately, as soon as he walks into the building and meets these players, the players are going to go, oh, wow. This is a guy that the Giants needed. He is a guy the Giants needed in that room badly. He's a culture guy. Yeah, he's not X's and O's. He's not X and O's scheme guy, but he's a culture builder. He is a foundation builder. He's a proven winner. So this is a home run hire for the Giants. And they've needed this guy in the building for a long time. Look, we saw how quick it took, right? We saw how quick it was. John Harbaugh was fired last Tuesday, right? Tuesday, January 6th. He was fired Tuesday, January 6th. Wednesday night on the 14th, he's got a job right away. And it was the New York Giants who immediately saw he was fired and said, yeah, that's our head coach. And they were looking at Kevin Stefanski. And they said, we like it, Kevin, but we need John Harbaugh. We want John Harbaugh. We like it, Kevin, but we want John Harbaugh. And he was hired, and they essentially brought him in. They brought him in for an interview yesterday. They brought him in for an interview in the building, and I bet that's when they essentially finalized the deal right there, or were working on the deal right there. John Mara and the Giants and Joe Shane, they were not letting him walk out the door without a deal. He was going to be their head coach. So I think it's a good hire for the Giants. They got good talent. obviously the Giants have some talent. They got obviously Jackson Dart, Cam Scott will be back, and Malik Neighbors. They'll have the 6th pick or so or 5th pick or so in the draft. So they can pick a receiver, they can pick offensive line, defensive line. They got some pass rushers. They got other talents. So they got a franchise left tackle in Andrew Thomas. This is a team that has got some pieces. Again, I don't know if they're a playoff team next year, but I certainly think that John Harbaugh can come in there and turn this team around into competitive and then build them into a playoff team. I've already seen some people say, well, yeah, he can make them into a 10-win team next year. We'll see, because again, this is a team that still won 4 games this past year. They still need a lot of things to go right. Like I said, Jackson Dart's got to stay healthy. He's got to stay healthy, and he's got to be active. He's got to be on the field. He's got to perform, and he's got to improve on a good rookie season overall when he was on the field. But he's got to stay on the field. If these things can kind of come together, they can have a nice season for themselves next year. If they win 9, 10 games, whatever, that's a bonus. But I think if they can go from 4 wins to about 8 wins, that's a good first step. Then the next year later, that could be your playoff year. But if they can win 9 or 10 games next year, that's a bonus. And maybe even sneak into the playoffs or such as a 7 seed or whatever, that'd be a bonus. And then you can give John Harbaugh Coach of the Year right away. But the Giants certainly have pieces, and this is a good spot for him. We'll see how Harbaugh's able to handle New York, but I think he'll be okay. Heck, I think if he wins, he'll be a rock star. If he wins in New York, he'll be, especially for the Giants, he'll be a rock star. So, but this is exactly the kind of, but that's for a year from now. We'll see how the season goes for the Giants next year. We'll see the kind of moves they make. We'll see the kind of draft picks they make. Obviously, that's for down the road. But for now, this is a good hire for the Giants. And for John Harbaugh, I think he lands in a good spot. If the Green Bay Packers obviously, and the Matt LaFleur obviously won't come to an agreement and they trade him or such, then I would have said the Packers would have been the best spot. But it looks like LaFleur and Green Bay will be together for at least a little while longer. And look, LaFleur is a good coach. But this is a good spot. And the spots available, that's not the Baltimore Ravens, of course, this was the best spot for John Harbaugh, even more so than the Pittsburgh Steelers, because Pittsburgh, there's a lot of questions. They don't know. They don't have the quarterback. They don't know, who knows what TJ Watt, who knows what Cam Hayward's future is. They don't, so there's a lot of questions with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So who knows? Speaking of the Steelers, obviously we'll see with Aaron Rodgers. Like I said, I think he's going to retire now that Tomlin's out, now that Tomlin's no longer there, because he did go to Pittsburgh for Mike Tomlin. But for the Giants, this was a great hire, and this is exactly the kind of hire they've been looking for a long time. Look, this is a team that, I know a lot of you maybe don't remember, but once upon a time, the New York Giants were one of the most prominent franchises in the National Football League. This is a Giants team that was winning, that went to 5 Super Bowls. That went to 5 Super Bowls. They won 4 of them. They multiple playoff appearances, NFC East division championships, and so on and so forth. Great Hall of Fame players, great coaches. This is a Giants team that is one of the most storied in NFL history and has such a great winning tradition, and they have completely gotten away from it since Super Bowl 46. Since Super Bowl 46, they have 3 winning seasons, 2 playoff appearances, and 1 playoff win. That's not the New York Giants. That's not New York Giants football. And Giants fans know that. And I think John Mara knows that. So what do? You got to find a guy who's a winner. And John Harbaugh certainly is a winner. So that's who they brought in, because he's a winner and they need to win football games because they're the New York Giants. You think they want to be compared constantly to being losers to their neighbors, the New York Jets, who have been losing, who have the worst. The New York Giants and Jets have the worst records in football over the last decade. Do you think they like being compared to losing and being in the same sentence like their neighbors, the Jets? Heck no, absolutely not. They want to go back to winning. The Giants want to go back to winning. They're about winning. They're about Super Bowls. They have 4 trophies in their case. They have 4 trophies in their trophy room. They want to win. They want to win Super Bowls. They have 5 NFC Conference Championship trophies in their room. They want to win. They want to win. They want to go back to winning Super Bowls. They want to go back to winning. They're tired of being They're tired of being a team that everybody in the NFCs beats up on, whether it's the Cowboys or the Eagles, even the Commanders. They don't want that. They want to win. They're the New York Giants. They're supposed to be the class team of both football teams. They're supposed to be the top. They're supposed to be the older brother, right? The brother, since we like to use the brother motto, they like to be the older brother when it comes to the Giants and the Jets. Well, neither of them have been older brother over the last 15 or so years. So the Giants need to win. They need to win now. So this is a good first step for them. And they've had this, then as soon as John Harbaugh became available, they said, that's our guy. That's our head coach. And I'm sure John Harbaugh looked at the Giants and said, hey, that's a good spot for me. So, and like I said, if he wins with the Giants, he'll be a rock star. So I think it's a good hire, and we'll see how it goes a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years, 5 years from now. It's supposed to be a 5-year deal. I think I read $22 million annually. So we'll see how it goes. But overall, I think it's a good It's a good hire for Harbaugh, and it's a good spot for the Giants. A good hire for the Giants and a good spot for Harbaugh. So we'll see. So we'll see how it goes. But John Harbaugh is the new head coach, or it looks like will be, and finalizing a 5-year agreement on 5-year contract as the new head coach of the New York Giants. On to the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes. We got to talk about Major League Baseball. We got to talk about the MLB offseason. One of the true last big dominoes that we're waiting on in Kyle Tucker. There's still Cody Bellinger. We're still waiting. I think Cody Bellinger is going to still be a Yankee, but we're still waiting on Bellinger. There's Bo Bichette. There's Framber Valdez. But the big fish is still Kyle Tucker. And there's 3 teams that are in it for Kyle Tucker right now, and we're waiting a decision on Tucker. Let me just double check just to make sure we haven't had a decision yet on Kyle Tucker. Who knows? Let me just see for you. Let me just make sure that the man hasn't made a decision yet, because we're all waiting on Kyle Tucker. We're all waiting on the decision, Kyle Tucker edition. No, he hasn't. So we're all waiting on the Kyle Tucker decision and where he'll go. But there are 3 teams interested in him: the Toronto Blue Jays, who have reportedly offered him a long-term contract. We don't know what that long-term contract though looks like. Jeff Passan said that the Blue Jays, it's possible that they are willing to go to 10 years for Kyle Tucker. Now, doesn't mean they have gone to 10 years, but Jeff Passan said that the Blue Jays could go to 10 years, which is ridiculous. But, for Kyle Tucker's a really good player, but this is also a guy who's been hurt a lot in his career. 10 years is a big one for Kyle Tucker. He's a real good player, but still. But the Blue Jays have offered a long-term contract to him. We don't know what that long-term contract looks like. So I think so. We don't really know for sure what that long-term deal looks like. The other team is the New York Mets. They have offered reportedly 4 years, a 4-year contract, maybe even 5. $50 million annually. I think around $200 million would be opt-outs. There would be opt-outs in this contract, but the Mets would be paying him higher money, AAV. He would be, I think, the highest paid left fielder or so in the game if he were to be a Met. And of course, as for all big free agents, there's the Los Angeles Dodgers. Yeah, there's the Los Angeles Dodgers. They're in it too. So, when he signs with the Dodgers, of course, don't be surprised. But those are the 3 teams that are interested in Kyle Tucker: the Toronto Blue Jays, the New York Mets, and the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Blue Jays seem to be giving him the longer years. The Mets seem to be giving him more money with the opportunity to opt out and get bigger money, because next year's offseason is, what is it, Jazz Chisholm and so on? It's not an impressive offseason class in free agency. That's even if we have a baseball season next year. But so he could get paid. Kyle Tucker could go to the Mets, have a big year, opt out, and get bigger money elsewhere, or even with the Mets. Who knows? But he would still be getting higher AAV with the Mets. Blue Jays, longer years. Dodgers, we'll see. Again, they could offer him. Dodgers either or, I guess, right? They could give him more money. They could give him more years. So we're all waiting right now on Kyle Tucker and where he will go. There were reports by Mike Puma of the New York Post that said the Mets were expecting to make a decision today. It is currently almost 9:30. We haven't heard anything. Steve Cohen is doing his tweeting thing, which I really, really wish he would stop. I really wish Steve Cohen would stop on the tweeting thing. But Steve Cohen first tweeted out. Steve Cohen made a little joke today about the for the smoke to come out, right? They select the Pope, and people first saw that and go, ooh, what does Steve Cohen know? What does Steve Cohen know? What does Steve Cohen know? But really, I mean, you see a tweet like this, he tweeted out, let me know when you see smoke. I mean, really, that's just Steve Cohen making the reference, of course, of when they choose the Pope. So, but everyone said, oh, what does he know? What does he know? What does he know? And then, of course, because of that, Steve Cohen has to clarify. He says later on, for those who understand the Pope election reference, we are waiting for a decision. That's all I know. Steve, stop tweeting and just focus on making the Mets a better baseball team. That's all as a fan that I ask you. Please stop tweeting. Please stop tweeting. But anyway, we'll see where he goes. If I have to pick where he goes, I think he's going to be a Toronto Blue Jay. I think he's going to want those longer years. I think he's going to want more years, and you'll still get the money, but he'll still get paid. He'll get a longer years, a team that's saying, hey, we think you're great. And meanwhile, while still getting paid, he'll have a home, right? These players want a home. Juan Soto is a Met. Why? Sure, the money, but he also now has a long-term home. Remember, this is a guy who bounced around, right? He was in the Nationals, then he went to San Diego, then he went to the Yankees. Like, this was a guy looking for a home for a long time, and he got it with the Mets. Kyle Tucker's another one. He went to Houston. He was in Houston, then he went to the Cubs. So he's kind of looking for, and he's 20, what was he, 27 or so years old, I think. Let me just double check that. Kyle Tucker is 20. Let me just double check that. He's 28 years old. He actually turns 29 in a couple days, January 17th. He turns 29 in a couple days. So he's 28, 29 years old. So he'll be 29 years old. He's looking for a home. He's looking for somewhere to stay for a long time in. And if Toronto's offering him a longer term contract, I think and with plus bigger money, I think he takes it. Plus, there's a guarantee. There's no guarantee we even have baseball next season. So even if he takes a deal with opt-outs, he's not going to opt out in a season where there might not be a baseball season. You know what I mean? We might not even have baseball next season. So I think he wants to go in a place where he has a longer term home. The team shows that they love him. They want him there. Not to say that I think the Mets do want Kyle Tucker, but clearly they want him on a shorter term deal with opt-outs while still giving him a lot of money. While Tucker might appreciate the money and appreciate the AAV, he's probably thinking, well, I'm just going to opt out of you guys anyway. So, and get paid elsewhere more than likely. So I think Tucker in the end is going to be a Toronto Blue Jay, but his sweepstakes obviously are interesting to watch. If he's on the Blue Jays, he adds more to that team, more versatility to the team, especially on the outfield. He gives more in that lineup, obviously, especially since they're going to need a bat because they might be losing Bo Bichette. Bo Bichette is still out there in free agency, and he's had interest from, say, the Yankees and the Phillies and so on and so forth. But while Bellinger obviously seems to be them and the Yankees trying to work things out, at least that's what it looks like. But Kyle Tucker will add versatility to the Blue Jays outfield and give Vladdy Guerrero another bat, to help him out. With the Mets, obviously he'll be the left fielder. I would think he'd be the left fielder. He would fill that need in left field that they're missing with Brandon Nimmo being traded, and he'd be a big bat in the middle of the order to help out Soto and Lindor, as they try to pick up the pieces together of this lineup without Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo. So you get a big bat in the lineup like Tucker along with Soto Lindor to also help out Jorge Polanco, to help out Marcus Semien. So obviously a big thing. That's obviously a big part of why. Now, Bellinger, it's interesting. I think he adds more to the Mets than, say, Tucker. Well, I think Tucker is a better player than Bellinger, and I think he would hit better at Citi Field than, say, Bellinger. Bellinger could play first base. He could play DH. He could play center field, left field, right field. He could play 5 different positions compared to Tucker, who can probably give you 1 or 2. So, maybe DH even too. So that would make 3. But Bellinger is more versatile than Tucker and probably would feel like the better fit for the Mets. But the Mets seems like they're trying to really get Tucker here. We'll see what they can. We'll see if they do. And of course, the Dodgers are still around. They're the Dodgers, But I think in the end, Kyle Tucker is going to be a Toronto Blue Jay. That's just my opinion. But we'll find out. He's really the last big fish in this free agency that we're kind of waiting on as spring training begins in a month from now, essentially, for all pitchers and catchers reporting around baseball. Let's go around some of the NFL. Let's go around some NFL news and insights. The Yankees made a trade. They traded for Weathers. They traded 4 prospects to the Miami Marlins for David Weathers' son. Actually, David Weathers' son. Ryan Weathers. So they traded 4 prospects for him. Ryan Weathers, from the son of David Weathers. He's had injury issues throughout his career. The Yankees traded 4 prospects for him. They're still interested in Freddie Peralta. They're still trying to figure out a way to get Freddie Peralta, it seems like, from the Brewers. Actually, Freddie Peralta, I should say, is the other big domino we're waiting to see. Aside from Kyle Tucker, we're waiting on Freddie Peralta to see what's gonna go on with him. But around the NFL, the Ravens, obviously, they're still trying. They've interviewed 11 coaching candidates, and the latest they interviewed today was Mike McDaniel. So I think Mike McDaniel, really, they're looking at him to be the offensive coordinator. I don't know if the Ravens should hire McDaniel, Saleh, or Flores. I don't know. There's just too much questions surrounding all 3 of them. If I'm the Ravens, I would hire Kevin Stefanski, but we'll see. McDaniel, I think, would be a great offensive coordinator if they can get him to be the offensive coordinator. But speaking of Robert Saleh, the Dolphins interviewed him today. The Ravens actually are going to interview Robert Saleh on Sunday. Patrick Mahomes provided injury updates, so obviously he's working his way back. They did say Mike Tomlin looks like will take a year off from coaching. It looks like he will take a year off from coaching. But I guess we'll see. We'll see about that. The Steelers obviously they're searching for a head coach. They have requested an interview of 49ers offensive coordinator Clay Kubiak. There's Clint Kubiak and then there's Clay Kubiak. So the Steelers obviously looks like they're looking for a new head coach and a young offensive-minded guy who will probably draft his own quarterback if the Steelers are in position to draft a quarterback. Like I said, we'll see. Fred Warner won't be activated from the IR for the divisional round. It looked like there could be some optimism that he could be activated. I think that was about a couple of weeks ago, but as the weeks were going on, it looked like less and less he would play. So it looks like Fred Warner looks like will not play, or now looks like he won't play at all in the game on Saturday against the Seattle Seahawks. So that's a big one for San Francisco. Anthony Weaver. Now, the New York Giants. John Harbaugh is the head coach now of the New York Giants. He is bringing in Todd Monken to be the offensive coordinator with the Giants. Those are reports. And among candidates for the defensive coordinator spot for the Giants is Anthony Weaver, who worked with the Ravens, former player with the Ravens, knows John Harbaugh, knows former player with the Ravens with Brian Billick, coach with John Harbaugh, and he's been coaching around the league with the Dolphins and the Texans and so on. He's been looking for head coaching interviews. The Ravens actually did interview Anthony Weaver, but the Giants and Harbaugh trying to bring him in to be their defensive coordinator. If they can get him to add him to be the defensive coordinator to go along with Monken, that's a pretty good coaching staff with Harbaugh, Monken, and Weaver. So that's pretty good. The Falcons have interviewed Jesse Minter. The Ravens also interviewed Jesse Minter as well. The Bucs interviewed Michael Clay for their special teams coordinator role. Obviously, the Bucs didn't fire Todd Bowles, but they are looking at new coordinators and new coaching staff. So a big year for the Bucs coming up. Let's go around wrestling. Let's go on wrestling. Let's talk a little quick wrestling. On Monday Night Raw. Not much to really go around with Monday Night Raw. There was a lot of promotions for next week's show in Belfast, Ireland. Next week. I think I remember talking about Drew McIntyre winning the WWE Championship from Cody Rhodes in our last show. But on Monday Night Raw this past week, again, more or less to build for next week's show in Belfast, Ireland. But this week's show was in Germany. We had CM Punk in the week after beating Braun Breaker for the WWE Championship to retain his World Heavyweight Championship. CM Punk and Finn Balor had a promo segment, which will lead to a match next week for the World Heavyweight Championship in Finn Balor's home nation of Ireland. Should be very interesting. Should be a lot of fun. I'm glad to see Finn Balor back in the main event scene. And I'm also happy to see CM Punk away from the Vision stuff, at least taking a break from the Vision stuff for at least a little bit. They're going to go back to it. Punk will face Braun Breaker again, probably maybe at WrestleMania. But it's nice to see Punk take a break from the Vision stuff, at least for a little bit. Maxine Dupree and Becky Lynch will have a rematch. Again, their 6th match in Ireland in Becky Lynch's home nation of Ireland for the Intercontinental Championship. And AJ Styles faced Gunther in the main event of Raw. Very, very good match. It ended with AJ Styles making Gunther tap out, but they did the whole thing where he taps out where the referee couldn't see it. And AJ Styles was like, hey, he tapped. And the referee was kind of going, they did that whole spot, and Gunther low blowed AJ and powerbombed to get the 1-2-3. So Gunther wins the match with some screwiness and all that stuff. So kind of the finish I expected, right? I felt Gunther would win, but I also think there'd be some screwiness to go along with it. So that was what they did. They kept building, of course, to the tag team stuff. We do have a tag team, a title match assignment event. There was a whole women's tag team, beginning of the show with Rhea and Io. Obviously, Rhea and Io are the new women's tag team champions. There was a triple threat women's tag team match to determine the number one contender between Bayley and Lyra, the Kabuki Warriors, and Liv Morgan and Roxanne Perez. Liv Morgan and Roxanne Perez won the match. So they will face Rhea and Io on Saturday Night's Main Event in a few weeks for the women's tag team championships. Stephanie Vaquer and Raquel Rodriguez continue their feud going on. So that feud's still going on. On Dynamite, MJF retained the title from Bandito in a pretty good match. Brody King came out to help out Bandito. So that probably sets up a future match with MJF and Brody King. I think that would be really fun, really good. I'm a big Brody King guy. Kenny Omega continues his journey back to the top of the world title picture in AEW. He did a promo segment with him and Hangman Page, Page, and Swerve Strickland. Don Callis showed up a couple more times because, we were doing well, man. We had 45 minutes to open the show with no Don Callis. Then he showed up, and I said, man, just what we needed. Just what I was missing. I was missing Don Callis. 45 minutes of the show. I was like, where's Don Callis? And then he showed up. I was like, hey, there he is, Don Callis. He showed up again a little bit later on to do commentary for the tag team match. As his, I'm trying to remember who was the group. Who was his? Trying to remember who was the two guys that won the match. There's like two. Again, there's so many members of the Don Callis family that I freaking forget. I forget who is the sometimes part of the family, who is part of the Don Callis family. But two members of the family, one to move on. They will face FTR for the tag team championships. Mark Davis and Jack Doyle. Thank you, Mark Davis and Jack Doyle. They won their match, and they will face FTR for the tag team titles. And a huge AEW news, a couple of big free agency news. AEW signed the Rascals. Wes Lee, more notably, is now a member of All Elite Wrestling. I think Wesley is a tremendous talent. I would not have let him go if I was WB. I think WWE made a huge mistake when they turned him heel. He should have been a babyface all the way. But now he's with AEW. Crowded roster, yes, but Wesley is really good. So I'm looking forward to seeing him there. But to continue the free agency talk, Powerhouse Hobbs' contract expired at midnight last night when they taped AEW Collision after Dynamite. Him and Samoa Joe and Shibata dropped the trios championships to Page and Jet Speed. That is, of course, Speedball Mike Bailey and Kevin Knight. So Page, and spoilers for Collision, yes, but Bailey, Page, and Knight are the new trios champions. The Ops dropped the belts, and Powerhouse Hobbs is a free agent, and he's heading to WWE for all intents and purposes. From all the reports that we're seeing, he's heading to WWE, and he's actually going to the main roster. Apparently, he's going to the main roster, not to NXT, which I think NXT really needs him. If you watch NXT on Tuesday, boy, they could use a Powerhouse Hobbs. But Hobbs he's leaving AEW for WWE, and I think again that's a good acquisition for WWE. He's still very good. He's still very young. I think his style will fit WWE more than AEW did. After 5.5 or so years, he was in AEW, but Powerhouse Hobbs is heading to WWE. So we'll see how he does on the main roster. Again, I'm a bit surprised he's on the main roster, it looks like he'll go to the main roster. If so, he does go to the main roster. I would be surprised by that. I would have thought he would start off in NXT. Heck, Ricky Saints started off in NXT. Saints was on it. Ricky Saints started off in NXT, but Powerhouse Hobbs is going straight to the main roster. Okay, but I think NXT needs him a little bit more. They need some talent right now on that roster. NXT does, but if he's going to the main roster, hey, good for him. And like I said, I think his style fits WWE more than it does AEW. But speaking of NXT, they continued the Blake Monroe. Blake Monroe cut a promo, and Jada Parker came out and interfered. So looks like we're having a feud between them. I don't remember seeing Thea Hale on the show, but Izzy Dame went out and cut a promo, and they continue the whole thing with her and Tatum Paxley. But you know, they I think Ava announced they tagged Ava with Obafemi dropping the title and vacating the NXT Championship. GM Ava Rain announced a tournament to determine 6 men who compete in a ladder match to determine the new NXT champion. I assume it's going to be Ricky Saints. It's got to be, right? There's nobody else on this roster. There's nobody else on this roster on the men's side that you could look at aside from Ricky Saints. I mean, maybe Joe Hendry, but aside from Ricky Saints, it's like, who else? It's got to be Ricky to be the new NXT champion. It's got to be, until the roster can start to kind of, regroup a bit. But it's got to be Ricky Saints. It's got to be. So the show ended again. Tony D'Angelo. What? Tony D'Angelo is still there. Why isn't he competing for the NXT championship? He's kind of just there right now. He's just kind of there. Stacks, who should be, I think, a bigger star, is shooting with Shiloh. I don't know what's going on with him. So the men's division right now in NXT is very wonky. It's very wonky. And so they need some talent. They need some talent right now on that roster. That's why I'm surprised Hobbs is going to the main roster in NXT. But it's Ricky Saints has got to win that title, right? He's got to be the one to win that title again. So, but that's going to do it today for MazzaOnSports. Thank you guys so much I will be back tomorrow to make my picks for the divisional playoff weekend, and we'll talk about Friday Night SmackDown tomorrow after SmackDown. So we'll talk about SmackDown and preview the divisional playoff. Oh, and we'll also recap and review TNA Impact on their first episode debut in AMC today. You know what? Let's see if we can get a little. Recap what's going on right now in Impact. Hey, look at that! Cora Jade, Elena Black is now a member of the TNA Knockouts division. So hey, good for her. So Cora Jade, or Elena Black, aka WWE Cora Jade, is now on TNA. So good for her. She's now a member of the TNA roster. Sonya Deville, look at that, is now a member of TNA. She's now going by Daria Ray. Candice Michelle is in attendance. Wow, look at that. Haven't seen her in a while. Wow, AJ Styles and Frankie Kazarian doing a segment, and AJ eyeing for the TNA title. Okay, interesting. So again, we'll recap it all. We'll recap it all tomorrow. So I just wanted to see any updates, whatever that's going on right now. So there's a couple of big ones, a couple of interesting ones. Sonya Deville, now a member of TNA, and Cora Jade is now a member of TNA. So little interesting tidbits there. So we'll review the first episode in full tomorrow on the show, along with the divisional playoffs and SmackDown. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. I greatly appreciate it. Give this video a like, share, and subscribe. Have yourselves a great night, and take care.